Hello, Mishpucha, it's Courtney, America's Jewish mother. Welcome back to my channel. It's Friday, so time for a Friday Reads video. I neglected to do one last week, so sorry about that. So I have 2 weeks worth of stuff to catch you up on. So in that amount of time, I have finished 5 books, and I'm currently reading 5 books, so let's go. So the first book that I finished was Heimrad Bäcker's poetry collection Transcript. This is basically found poetry or concrete poetry from the Holocaust. Bäcker uses a bunch of different sources in assembling this volume. Some were accounts of eyewitnesses or people who just sort of stood by. Some were eyewitness accounts from victims of or survivors of the Holocaust, from their own memoirs or court documents, things like that. And some documents were from Nazi perpetrators, including their own personal memoirs, diaries, documents that went back and forth between Nazis during the Holocaust, and then court documents afterwards, like in the Nuremberg trials and things like that. So basically what it does is it more or less creates a transcript, as implied by the title, of what happened. This was very good. I gave this 5 stars. It is probably going to be the best poetry collection I read all year. So every single page of this volume is connected to a source, which is listed in the back. So if you want to read more about any of this information, you are, connected to the source so that you can do that. And I thought that was really good because it, makes sure everything is well documented. And the other interesting thing about this volume is that Heimrad Bäcker was an Austrian writer who was himself involved with Hitler Youth in his younger days, and he was admiring of Adolf Hitler up until his late teens and early 20s. But then after the war, he kind of saw how how things really were, and was very ashamed of his past and repented of it, and spent a lot of the rest of his career sort of trying to atone for his earlier views. And let me tell you, this is how you do that. So yeah, I thought this was really great. Probably the 2 things that I found most striking about this volume were, one, the sheer numbers that are represented here. I mean, they don't mean anything when you just see them on the page, but then when you look back at the sources to see what the numbers are, and on one left side of the page you've got the number of people, say, coming into the concentration camp, which, I mean, is usually only a few dozen or maybe close to 100, compared on the right-hand side of the page with the numbers of people who are being gassed and executed on a daily basis. I mean, the numbers are just staggering. They're like dozens and maybe close to 100 people coming in a day versus, thousands being executed on a daily basis. I mean, it's just, it's mind-boggling, really. So that was one thing I was particularly struck by. I mean, not surprising, but it was striking. And then the other thing that I was struck by, again, so striking but not necessarily surprising, were documents that were exchanged, among Nazi officials and administrators during the Holocaust to sort of purposefully obfuscate what was happening, what was going on. Again, that was something I was already familiar with in concept, but again, to see it here sort of so raw was very striking. So yes, this was excellent. I read this upon the recommendation of Mark Nash and Roz at Skylar about the books. Was very happy that I did. Would recommend this to anyone. 5 stars. I also finished in the past 2 weeks The Edwardians by Vita Sackville-West. I did this as a buddy read with Margaret Pinard, and I'm not going to say too much about it here because Margaret and I are planning to do a live show about The Edwardians later today. That will happen on her channel at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific, if you want to check that out. But I ended up giving this book 3.25 stars. It tells the story of Sebastian, who, when we meet him, is 19 years old. And he's at kind of a transition point in his life. He is the wealthy, privileged son of an estate owner. The estate is called Chevron. And, he doesn't quite know what's going to become of his life, even though it's pretty much mapped out for him. But the country is also at a transitional point because the Edwardian period itself was not very long. It was from, I think, 1901 to maybe the very beginning or right before the beginning of World War I in 1914. So it was not a very long rule of Edward the 7th. I think it was Edward the 7th. Could be wrong about that. I'll let you know if I was. So yeah, so we see the so we see them at sort of a critical juncture, right? Both the country itself, but also as Sebastian's at a critical juncture, and it's essentially Vita Sackville-West's critique of this time period and the sort of elite, lavish lifestyle. I wanted to like this more than I did, and I ended up giving it 3.25 stars. There were things about it that I enjoyed, but I felt like it was a lot of telling and not a lot of showing. But I will talk more about this when Margaret and I do our live show, which will be this evening again, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on today, Friday, or 3 p.m. Pacific. So finish that. I also finished my fifth of six books for the Booktube Prize. I am judging nonfiction semifinals Group A. So I finished Wayetu Moore's memoir, The Dragons, the Giant, the Women. I cannot tell you my thoughts about it here because I have not yet submitted my ballot and rankings. But I will, I have already recorded my thoughts elsewhere. That will go up in a vlog once the finals round is underway, so probably the very, very end of this month or very beginning of August. So finish that. The next book I finished was actually a children's book. It was Sideways Stories from Wayside School by Lewis Sachar. This is like a children's chapter book. It's like 125 pages. It has 30 stories in it about this school, Wayside School, which was built incorrectly. It was supposed to be 30 classrooms, one story all in a row, but instead they built it 30 stories high, one classroom on each story. And this is about the teachers and children in the classroom up at the top of the 30th story. Now the reason I read this, because I do not usually read children's books as part of my regular reading routine, is because the sixth and final book that I'm reading for the Booktube Prize this round is Christina Lamb's Our Bodies, Their Battlefield, which is about the use of rape as a weapon of war, and as you can imagine, that's quite dark and heavy and depressing, and I needed something lighter and joyful and nostalgic to balance that out. So I read this. This was very delightful. I gave it 4 stars. Would definitely recommend it as a children's book. It was super cute. And then the last book that I finished within the past 2 weeks was The Cairo House by Samia Serageldin. Samia Serageldin was born in Egypt and now divides her time between Egypt and London and the United States, I believe. So this is as part of my own personal Arab American literature project that I'm doing this year, where every month I read one book by an Arab American writer. And this read to me like sort of thinly veiled autobiography. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars. I appreciated seeing how the political scene in Egypt had a lot of change that happened over time. The main character in this book, Gigi, is born into a wealthy, politically connected family during the time when Egypt was still a kingdom, and her family is related to the Pasha, and then we see the coup d'etat and revolution of 1952, which results in Nasser taking power and implementing a form of what he calls Arab socialism, and how that drastically affects this family's status during that time period. Although honestly, it seemed like the worst thing that happened was that the Pasha gets placed under house arrest for like 20 years or something like that. Which, I mean, I'm not saying is nothing, but like if that's the worst thing that happens to you, it's you know, you're probably doing pretty good. So, and then we also see the Anwar Sadat years, and by the time the novel ends, we're in the Hosni Mubarak years of Egypt's political landscape. So that was interesting to see over time. Although again, I will say we're reading it through this like wealthy, well-connected family who, you know, does not need for basic resources and, you know, doesn't really fear for their lives to any great extent. And we also sort of see Gigi, the main character, come of age because she grows up, she gets married to someone she's expected to get married to, they have a son, we see her move to different countries, and by the end of the novel, when she's back visiting Egypt again, she's sort of torn between this nostalgia for the Egypt that she knew and loved growing up, especially the titular Cairo House, which was a very sort of glamorous setting and a setting of a lot of optimism and luxury and comfort, versus the sort of dawning acknowledgement and realization that you can never really go home again. So I appreciated the sort of seeing the political changes in Egypt over time, although I wish there had kind of been more reflection on that. But I also felt like none of the characters was really well developed, and I did find the ending rather trite. So I would recommend it with those reservations, so 3 stars. So that is everything I finished in the past 2 weeks. So as far as what I'm currently reading, I'm still making my way through the essential writings of Ralph Waldo Emerson. I have recently finished the essays, the first series of essays, and I'm going to move on to the second series. So making progress. So still making progress. Maybe not as fast as one would want, but I'm definitely going to finish it before the end of the year, and that's the main thing. So I also just started yesterday The Travelers by Regina Porter. This was gifted to me by Lindsay during our holiday book exchange last year. And I'm not very far into it. I'm only about 33 pages in, but it is compelling reading so far. Thus far, it's sort of tracing the lineage of 2 families whose families end up intertwining, I believe, or interconnecting, I believe. So I'm seeing some of the backstory there, and it is compelling so far, but more thoughts on this when I've actually gotten farther into it, or further into it. I'm also reading my sixth of 6 Booktube Prize books for this round, which is Christina Lamb's Our Bodies, Their Battlefield, which I already mentioned earlier. And again, this is a book about the use of rape as a weapon of war, and it is quite dark and heavy reading, and I don't think it's a spoiler to say that. I think one would expect that, which is a book about, from a book about rape. I mean, every chapter it's like, what fresh hell is this, basically. So, but I can't really say anything else about it, but I will, when I finish it, record my thoughts to go up in the Booktube Prize vlog, which will go up either at the very end of this month or the very beginning of August. I'm also still reading Emma by Jane Austen for Jane Austen July. I'm reading this as a buddy read with Kim at Middle of the Book March and Misa at Books and Sushi. I am about 3/4 of the way through this novel, and I'm still enjoying it, although I do feel like parts of it in the middle have kind of dragged, and it's like stretched out really longer than it actually needs to be. But I am still enjoying Emma as a character, and I'm curious to see how things are going to wrap up in the last several chapters, so yeah. And then the last book that I'm currently reading is Louis Menand's The Free World, and I'm pleased to say that as of last night, I made it to page 601. And before you get to all of the endnotes, bibliography, index, and things like that, the actual contents of this book are close to 730 pages long, so now I have fewer than 130 pages left, so that's very exciting. And I will say, like, I have enjoyed this, and I think every time I've talked about it, I've said that I've been enjoying it, and I have. So, some of the chapters I have found more engaging than others, because some of them I'm just sort of more interested in the figures and concepts being discussed than other chapters. But overall, really good reading, very engaging, and yeah, I think I'll be a little bit sad to see this end, even though I'm also sort of excited to see the end of it, because I feel like I've been reading it for so long, because I've been reading it all month. But yeah, so that's still going well. Okay, so that is everything that I either finished in the past 2 weeks or I'm currently reading. Again, just to plug the live show that Margaret and I are going to do later, that'll be at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. Pacific on Margaret's channel, which I will link down below, and we will be discussing The Edwardians by Vita, Sackville-West. So thank you for watching this. I hope everyone is staying healthy and well. I hope you're doing good reading whatever you're reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call your mother?